And again, many thanks for your interest in this exchange of views with us. In the morning, we unfortunately were only able to give the floor to 14 of your representatives, and on my list there are another 20 or so.
There were four
so
speakers.
I would be very grateful if you keep your presentations as short as possible so that we might also enter into some kind of dialogue. Keep in mind that you have provided us already a lot of written information, and many of you also have their statements now in writing. So just that we make the best use of our time. Would you like to?
I'd just like to add something, and we got as far as number 14 and 15, and
no 15 not.
No, 15 not yet.
Yeah,
and
I start with 15.
Okay, so we have that, and this afternoon some of you may have been there. We had the first exchange with the government delegation with over 40 government representatives, and they answered questions that we posed to them on the common core document. Some of the issues were raised by you, the NGO community, this morning, but you, now we should first deal with the ones which we were going to do, as Manfred Nowak said this morning. We'll start with those four. There are only four.
No, there are 23 or 24.
Yeah. Are you sure?
Okay, we do them first, and then we.
Okay. And then we should get the time to go at least on the first cluster, Article 1 to 5 of both covenants. That would be really important.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I think
that's why I said we should try to keep them as short as possible, so that
yes. And certainly not longer than 5 minutes.
Yeah. So we start Ms. Wu Su Liang, Taiwan Dongxi, on non-heterosexual rights. That's you. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, dear honorable committees. Ashley Wu, Director of International Affairs of Taiwan Tongsi Association. I'm also the board member of ILGA Asia. ILGA is the largest LGBTI NGO in the world, and also has the status, consultative status in UN. So thanks for this great opportunity to address LGBTI special issues and situations in Taiwan here. Because as the chairs has just mentioned before, so I will make it short because I would address some general issues about the LGBTI people in Taiwan. So I won't go further into the very details. Okay. Since this morning, we have heard that this several times that human rights is universal value, and I think we have to question this. Human rights is constructive. Human rights is a dynamic process. And if it is not, the treaties like CEDAW, CRC, MWC, and CPD won't be existing at this moment. So the point here I would like to make is, even under basic international human rights standards and spirit of gender mainstream, gender minority like LGBTI and people who live with HIV and sex workers are left behind in Taiwan society. So if we look at the initial report and the list of issues carefully, unfortunately, I have to say, there are only very, very, very few sections and paragraphs about LGBTI and other gender minorities. So this explains all. So the government are the LGBTI issues only related to the rights to the family, right to education, right to work, and right to health? No. LGBTI people are entitled to enjoy all kinds of rights in ICCPR, ICESCR, and other international human rights treaties. So government should play a positive role in protecting gender minority rights. For instance, Taiwan has a very, very progressive law for the HIV and AIDS, but unfortunately, it has never been put into practice. HIV positives' rights are violated by other individuals, private sectors, and most of time from our own government. When the for example, when the complaint submit, government are not happy to see it and are not happy to deal with it, and always use the very, very long administrative procedure to block this complaint from the individuals. So these are the examples. And other example is, like, for example, like Taiwan government has passed some acts to protect sexual orientations on education and employment. But for gender identity for the transgender people and the intersex people are not included into this. Yeah. So Taiwan has understand that SOGI, sexual orientation and gender identity, is a very, very new concept in Taiwan and even in the international level. That Hotline strongly suggests that state should adopt Jakarta principle as a guideline for ICCPR and ICESCR to implement in all levels. States should also bring the spirit of SOGI in policy making and practicing in legislation and administration levels. States should also play an active role, not a passive role, in promoting and protecting LGBTI rights in individuals, groups, communities, private sectors, and state levels. So, to end in this speech, so I would like to quote the Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, his speech on the Day Against the Violence for the Homophobia. So he said, I understand it can be difficult to stand up to public opinion, but just because a majority might disapprove of certain individuals does not entitle that the state to withhold their basic rights. Democracy is more than majority rules. It requires defending vulnerable minorities from hostile majorities. It thrives on diversity. Government has a duty to fight prejudice, not feel it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, also for staying exactly within your 5 minutes. Yes.
Just, I'm sorry to interrupt, Manfred, but I just wanted to say, because you're correct in saying that LGBTQI, by the way, not just I,
Yeah.
is something that's very new, not just for Taiwan, but for many, many
Yeah.
governments in the world. And so maybe it will help your cause better if you are more specific in your recommendations. When you say that, that the government should play a more positive role, a more proactive role, why don't you give an example so that they can understand better, because they know nothing about this concern.
Yes, we will still have other opportunity to speak during the whole process and reviewing process. So we will have those kind of recommendations. Yes.
Just a very, very short point. In my own country, in Germany, the Federal Constitutional Court last week came out with a decision of consecutive adoption of gay and lesbians, and now even the opponents from the Christian Democratic Party have come out with a vote fast. Now they will make all the taxation laws, all the inheritance laws, everything there, full treatment. And the Federal Constitutional Court quoted our General Comment number 20 on sexual identity and LGBT rights specifically. So something is moving, but you need the concrete example, as my colleague has just said.
Thank you very much. Now I call upon the Taiwan Domestic Partner Task Force, Chin Chi. You have the floor, madam.
Hello, dear honorable guests. My name is Victoria Xiawenxi. I'm president of Taiwan Alliance to Promote Civil Partnership Rights, TAP-CPR. And today I want to respond to item 66 on the list of issues concerning the ICCPR regarding Article 23. And please note that Taiwan law does not permit same-sex marriage, nor does it provide protection for unmarried cohabiting partners, whether they be heterosexual or homosexual. However, the national census conducted by the Directorate General of Budget, Accounting and Statistics once each decade continues to list a cohabitate and with spouse under the same heading, which fails to reflect the reality of unmarried cohabitating households in society and recognize the diversity of sexual orientations and gender identities in Taiwan. Actually, if you take a look at the core document forming part of the report, it contains only the information about low-income families and single-parent families. There are no data concerning the LGBTQI families. And of course, it exists a lot of LGBTQI families in Taiwan without any legal protection. And given that Taiwan's current legal regime only provides protection for relationships based on heterosexual marriage, other types of intimate relationships and families currently existing in society fail to receive recognition and protection under the law. Therefore, homosexual partnerships and unmarried heterosexual cohabiting partners are the subjects of ever-present stigmatism and discrimination. Also, there would be significant obstacles in exercising the rights discussed in the ICCPR, and any policy measures based on marriage or familial relationship will, by definition, exclude all sexual diverse family members. Under Taiwan law, several hundred or even thousands of types of benefits, legal rights, and statuses are based on marriage or family status. And therefore, sexual diverse partners cannot marry and must cohabitate with essentially no protection for their relationship status or the accompanying rights, in addition to those items specifically mentioned in Taiwan's official human rights report, which is in paragraph 289 of the state report. There are still numerous areas where this individual lack protection, including the spousal right of inheritance, marital leave, survivor's allowance, etc., and especially qualification for social insurance and others. And regarding the ROC official response to item 66, we wish to point out that the government agency responsible for the national census is the DGBAS, while the Ministry of Justice is responsible for laws related to marriage and family. Given that the long-standing nature of the issues raised by the TAP-CPR, the government's response that the Executive Yuan Department of Gender Equality has only been established for a short period of time seems unhelpful and irrelevant. We have two recommendations. One, the first, we ask that the government make a timely and determined effort to investigate and ascertain the true status of unmarried cohabiting persons in Taiwan society and make necessary revisions to the national census, both to correct any deficiency and to reflect the sexual orientation and gender identity of Taiwan's citizens. And second, we think that the government should enact laws to protect the rights of LGBTI families and other non-marital heterosexual families without delay, which means including but not limited to the legalization of gay marriage. And because we think that only through legal protection of one's relationship status can we help to reduce and eliminate social prejudice, and thus fully realize the various rights discussed in the covenants. And last thing, I want to point out that, any delays in codifying these rights for LGBTI people should not be blamed on the need for further study and research, just as Taiwan government has suggested in its official response to this item. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I call now on Jen Y. Jen,
Okay.
transgender punk activist. Please.
Which number?
17. Michael.
I am Chen Wei-zhen, a transgender punk activist. I'm a student. I will report on the issues related to transsexual, intersex people, and social support. During the past 10 years, 4 transsexuals committed suicide, but things have not changed. We know that these particular group members have to go through the transition from one gender to another. They bear a very high risk. Many of them are unemployed and stuck in poverty for a long time. In the area of education, because of gender dysphoria, many of these group members had to drop out of school. This is especially serious in high school students. For mental and physical health, fewer and fewer doctors are willing to provide gender identity disorder diagnosis and treatment, hormone treatment. Not to mention, such treatments are not reimbursed by the National Health Insurance System. As far as Social Security is concerned, the state does not subsidize gender reassignment surgery, and as these transsexual or intersex people have to replace their old ID cards with new ones, there are no government subsidies for these procedures either. For intersex people, these people are born with the reproductive organs of both sexes. So sometimes they were forced to
Just,
I'm nervous.
yeah, but just a little bit slower, then it helps.
So shall I start with the intersex people again? For intersex adults, they very often will have to go through a surgery again if they have decided which gender they would like to have. And then on page 191 of this LOI, you will see what the government has done so far is very limited. There's just another commissioned research project on the identification cards replacement system. Moreover, the government has proposed guidelines for gender equality policies. However, this is very far-fetched from our daily life. So we call on government to face the reality by improving the existing gender-related ID card replacement system. There should be enactment to provide direct support to the transsexual, intersex, and transgender people. There should be cross-departmental platform too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Sorry for having interrupted you. But thanks for providing us your information. And now I call upon Eden Social Welfare Foundation, Kuang Waijeng. Is not here? Then we continue with the Taiwan Access for All Association, and I don't.
It's me.
That's you.
Thank you.
Please.
我是台北市行外资源推广协会专案经理。
Hi, I'm the project manager from Taiwan Access for All Association. And I want to talk about Article 15 from ICESCR. Because people with disabilities have difficulties to join some artistic or cultural activities, such as work at exhibition hall and others. And there aren't enough sign language, tour guide, or other relevant services. There aren't enough school facilities or stadium facilities for people of disabilities. And when it comes to media, there aren't enough caption, there aren't enough sign interpreters, or there isn't simultaneous captioning services in the meeting, just like what we are experiencing right now. And since there isn't sufficient accessible environments, there are many rights of people of disabilities that are infringed upon. For example, in many outdoor spaces, in parks, on the pedestrians' walks, they don't necessarily always have accessible entries or exits. Voting booth, again, is not very accessible. The family members of the people of disabilities cannot accompany them to cast votes. Only the guardians at the voting booth can accompany the people with disabilities. Well, in fact, the law allows the family members to accompany the people with disabilities, but sometimes the people at the voting booth do not understand law. When it comes to transportation, there aren't enough accessible transportation and transportation-related services. And it costs a lot for the people of disabilities. There is an insufficient number of accessible buses, and there is a wide gap between rural areas and urban areas, where the latter have better accessible transportation. At the ports or at the boating area of ships and boats, there's limited accessibility, and therefore it is very dangerous for people of disabilities to use these transportation services. There are only 1 to 2 seats designated for people of disabilities, which means there's a great shortage. And if there's a group, if there's a small group of people with wheelchair that need to take trains, then they have to register with the train services first. And the culture of the deaf people are not respected and guaranteed. For a very long time, people of disabilities' right to take part in a national examination have been infringed upon and limited. For example, I am not allowed to become a diplomat. And people of disabilities are also limited when it comes to the purchase of financial commodities. People who are blind cannot go to banks by themselves to open accounts. This is a great limitation. And ATMs are not very accessible because of the height of the ATM. And no audio service or captioning services are provided at ATMs, so people with visual impairments cannot use ATMs. So my conclusion is that, again, we would like to call upon the government to realize ICCPR and the act to protect people with disabilities, and sign the CRPD as soon as possible so that the rights of the people with disabilities can be protected and guaranteed. Thank you.
For your contribution. And I continue with Citizen Congress Watch, Su Chia-wen. If it's not here, then the Campaign for Media Reform, Chiu Chia Yi. Yeah, but I asked before, and I was told there. So, Campaign for Media Reform is here? No? Taiwanese Feminist Scholars Association, Chen Yao Hua. Taiwanese Feminist Scholars. Okay. So then we are through. Or anybody who has requested to take the floor, who is still here and has not had the chance? I mean, we are happy if we have more time to... Sorry for the confusion, but we had different lists. So I have now still a list of NGOs who would like to speak on Article 2, the non-discrimination clause, in the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and then we have a similar list for the Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Since these are again quite long lists, please try to be as concise as possible. So I don't have names, but the organizations. The first one would be the Anti-Action Coalition.
I hope they have something positive to say.
Action.
Okay, 2 minutes.
Yeah, you might speak from the back, so you don't have to come. So who is speaking? Please.
Perhaps you could announce who's the next one, so
Yeah.
that we don't have to wait each.
So perhaps I go through. The next one is the Guardian Alliance of Panja, then IPACT, Tao Foundation, and Environmental Jurists Association. So those are the first 5 ones. Please, you have the floor.
各位委员，大家好。
Good afternoon. I am the representative from Anti-Action Coalition. The indigenous languages in Taiwan are considered by the UN as languages that are dying, and I think the government should bear full responsibility. Take this meeting, for example, indigenous languages are legal languages here, but does the government provide equal treatment for indigenous people? Now, following, I'm going to speak in my indigenous language to explain the indigenous people's rights in land, in ocean resources, in water resources, and to explain the inequality treatment that we face. And we have provided the translation version of my statements, but I will be speaking in my mother language, which is an indigenous language.
또 윌랑님은 또 로마原住民族안 하네. 알아 하네.
To respond to the list of issues submitted to the review committee for initial ICCPR reports, Article 1st and 27th issue number. The number 1 issue that I want to raise is that the Taitung County government of Taiwan defines some of the residents in the Amis Sidong community in Shangwon village illegally occupying the state-owned land, and the government forced them to move. Meanwhile, in the year of 2004, the government permitted the development application of the establishment of a big hotel, the Miramar Resorts, without consulting the local residents first. Although the Kaohsiung High Administrative Court has ruled that the development project violated the Environmental Impact Assessment Act, and the protests from indigenous groups and environmental protection groups went on continuously, the local government still permitted the Miramar Resort to operate. This case was cast in lawsuit twice, respectively in 2008 and 2010, and the local residents of that area and environmental protection groups have been requesting the suspension of the project. However, the county mayor was determined not to order the suspension. During that period of time, many construction projects continue to go on and continuously damage the environment. Indigenous lands and territories have long been developed and destroyed. In addition, there has been no discussion on the damages caused by the hotel project on traditional community life at all administrative levels. The indigenous people's right to land and traditional territory not only hasn't been recognized and protected by the government, but being violated in the name of economic development, which costs the loss of traditional culture. Recently, a series of incidents like the anti-Miramar resort protest, the Dao peoples protesting against the BOT, Build, Operate, and Transfer project of the Songmu Lake, Tao peoples opposing to the inadequate BOT development of Ali Mountain, repeatedly show that the government only cares about pursuing development and ignores the indigenous people's unique right to traditional territory, and fails to acknowledge that for indigenous populations, land does not represent simply a possession or a means of production. It is not a commodity that can be appropriated, but a physical element that must be enjoyed freely. It is also essential to understand the special and profoundly spiritual relationship of indigenous peoples with Mother Earth as basic to their existence and to all their beliefs, customs, traditions, and culture. The indigenous people's right to land has not been respected in the past decades, and their rights to manage and utilize the land has been restrained and deprived, which not only affect their basic livelihood but further damages the practice of sustainable and traditional knowledge of land. I think I'll conclude my statement here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The Guardian Alliance of Bangka.
各位委员好，我是那个代表台湾原住民部落行动联盟的黄杰，然后我现在最主要我要讲到几个，我相信委员手上应该是有我们的英文翻译的内容，不知道有没有英文翻译的，如果没有的话没关系，我直接讲好了。
Is there we can't hear the interpretation.
I think you have the English version of our statement in your hands. I wonder whether you have it. It is okay if you don't have it. I would just go ahead.
Somebody distribute us English language statement. Yeah. Okay, please.
OK. 我最主要讲的就是有关于台湾有一个原住民族基本法。
In Taiwan, there's Indigenous People's Basic Law, and this law is not being implemented. Because according to this law, the government recognizes the Indigenous people's rights to land and natural resources. The Act provides that the relevant authority shall amend, legislate, or repeal relevant regulations in accordance with the principles of this law within 3 years from its effectiveness. However, the government did not only fail to amend the relevant regulations after 8 years, but even worse, several regulations which violate the core principles of the Indigenous Basic Law were legislated. And this clearly violates ICCPR Article 1, Item 1 and ICCPR General Comments Number 12. In the first national report submitted by the government, it only narrated out the present regulation in a list, but failed to propose the plans to deal with the situation that the state laws are in fact violating indigenous people's rights to autonomy. In 2011, the Council of Indigenous Peoples again proposed the draft of Indigenous Self-Government Act, yet in this draft, it is not indicated whether or not indigenous self-government is with any actual autonomous power on administration, jurisdiction, and legislation. Furthermore, in the draft, there is no definite territory of indigenous peoples, not to mention the autonomous region as to comply with the boundary of current administrative division of cities and countries. And we think the indigenous people's basic law is the very first step of the government to fulfill its duty to safeguard the rights of indigenous peoples. But the government fails to obey the provisions of the basic law. It even denies or cripples its effectiveness. I think these facts are the root causes to the issues mentioned in ICCPR Article 1. And our recommendations include the following. First of all, the government agencies at all levels shall recognize the actual meaning of the indigenous people's natural sovereignty, fully understand the historical elements and context of indigenous people's collective rights, and fulfill the protection of the right to self-determination provided in both ICCPR and ICESCR, as well as the free, prior, and informed consent principles enshrined in UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Our second recommendation is that the government shall take action to review the controversy and conflicts between existing laws and the indigenous people's basic law, and clarify the causes of those conflicts. A feasible and a schedule of amending existing laws shall then be proposed and carried out carefully. Our third recommendation is that the government agencies at all levels shall adopt the human rights-based approach as the foundation of policy making, meaning the government is not use a top-to-down approach. Instead, it should help to guarantee the protection of the rights of the indigenous peoples. All the policies shall be based on the principle of empowerment, capacity building, and respecting indigenous subjectivity, so that we can lead to the result the indigenous people can have their rights fully protected. I'm also here on behalf of an indigenous group. I want to speak on the reconstruction after Typhoon Morakot. Now, to respond to Article 1 and Article 27 in ICCPR, I want to say that the Morakot Post-Disaster Reconstruction Special Act made by the government violates ICCPR Article 1, Article 2, Article 12, and 27. It also violates UN DRIP Article 10 and generate disastrous results for indigenous people. The act that I just mentioned violates the principles provided by the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. Excludes the participation of indigenous peoples and allows the outsiders to make decisions on the safety of the community and the destiny of the people. The lawmaking process do not have provide translation to the indigenous people in indigenous languages and fails to provide adequate information. The indigenous people's rights are violated without their awareness. The Act includes unreasonable provisions on forced relocation and land requisition. The reconstruction actions and policies fail to investigate the man-made causes led to the disaster, and many state compensation cases were thus filed. However, the government's definition of community consensus is blurred and vague. And the Taiwanese government and Council of Indigenous Peoples should draft a specific report regarding the forced relocation. Disrespect and violation of indigenous people's free will, which happened in the process of the Morakot post-disaster reconstruction. The government shall also provide reviews on state compensation cases filed by Hao-Cha community and Chatlian community and ensure the judicial process will be just and fair. So the relocation project was not fully considered, and it did not consider the opinions of the indigenous people. The government unilaterally decide what is safe and what is not. Indigenous people's lives are deeply connected to the land. If they are forced to relocate, their life as indigenous communities will be totally lost. This violates ICCPR Article 27, and it also violates the General Comment number 7. So a lot of challenges are there, and our recommendations are as follows. The government should take immediate action to review and examine the policy on the special zone designation and permanent housing. The government should re-evaluate the risk of the loss of indigenous people's culture and recognize the urgent need and right of indigenous communities to return to their traditional site of residency and sustain their culture. The government shall amend the act to solve the above-mentioned problems, and the indigenous people's collective opinions and demand shall be included and reflected in the amendment process. Our second recommendation is that in the reconstruction process, the government ignores the willingness and the opinions of the indigenous peoples, and we think the government shall submit a review report. And the government should also invite a third impartial party to investigate the cause of the disasters. And our third recommendation, there are several court cases that are ongoing, and some judges think our situations cannot invoke the two covenants. We think it is unbelievable. The two covenants and the Indigenous Peoples Act are laws, and they shall be considered by the judiciary. I know the time is limited, but our organization has submitted a shadow report, and you may find more information in our shadow reports. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. On behalf of which organization?